Well, like you said, my name is Steward, and this is Jill Strange, and we're very excited to be here with you today. We've got a pretty interesting talk, if I must say so myself. So we're going to cover a few different things. We've had a lot of folks come by the booth and ask us, what this is all about. So hopefully you'll leave here today with a better understanding about that and understanding about what we're doing in this area, which I think is really innovative and really creative. So for that, and you guys are going to have to accept my apologies. I kind of walk around, and if I'm getting too distracted, just raise your hand and tell me. We're going to cover three areas. The first thing is we're going to talk about some lessons from the past, right? What can we learn from the past, in this case, the distant past, and apply it to what we're doing today, and how can technology be applied to those themes? Jill is going to talk to you about this AI and machine learning tools that we have and how those can apply. And then finally, she's going to give you a brief demo and talk about how this works in practice. So first thing, I think it's important to set the stage in terms of artificial intelligence, what it is, what it isn't. There's, as you guys know, there's no shortage of hyperbole around this topic. Artificial intelligence dates back to the 1950s. We've been trying to beat, Watson at chess, for example, dating back several centuries. More recently, we have Siri. Apple introduced Siri in 2011 and was the first major technology provider to do that. Siri, depending on your view, is kind of helpful sometimes. Alexa, obviously we're partial here to Amazon, much more useful, but in a lot of cases it just turns out to be a voice-activated speaker, right? Home speaker, or set the timer in your kitchen, or whatever the case might be. In terms of HCM, today we see a lot of, we go to human capital management shows, a lot of HR shows, and there's a lot of buzzwords around bots and what they are, and really, when it boils down to it, it's not really what we would think of as artificial intelligence or machine learning. So you take that and you couple it with talent management, right? If you think about the history of HR, not too long ago, it was just a matter of how many people do I have, how many people left, how many people did I hire, just very standard type of metric items, right? Pretty basic stuff. But in very large organizations, those can actually be very challenging questions to answer in some cases. Then you move forward, right? Now we're starting to get a little bit smarter. How long did they stay? Why did they leave? When did they leave? Where did they go? And so we're taking all of these different elements, combining them with what we were already tracking from a metric perspective, and now we're getting to the point where we're saying, okay, who are my top performers? Who's at risk of leaving? How can I retain them? What are some things that I can do to take action to make sure that I keep the workforce that I'm hiring, and how do I keep them? So, and all the things that go with that, right? We want to reduce turnover, increase productivity, all that stuff. So the cool thing that we, Infor, bring to the table is we take those two different strings and we infuse machine learning and artificial intelligence with our deep understanding of this field, right? So we bring 17 years of research to the table in these areas, combine that with, and what Jill's going to talk to you and the team of folks that Jill has around data science and data analysis, and bringing those together into a much more usable solution that can help organizations with these challenges that we're all faced with today. So Infor. So I mentioned Infor. I've had a lot of questions at the booth this week. Who is Infor? What do you do? How come I don't know who you are? And it turns out that a lot of folks know who Infor is, but they know us by the solutions that we have acquired over the years or what have you. But today, in this session, we're talking about talent science. So who is Infor and Infor Talent Science? Well, we're a predictive AI-driven application. We use data and science to fundamentally change the way that we're retaining folks and hiring folks within organizations. We're committed to results, taking the subjectivity out of the hiring process and infusing science with that and making it easy for our customers. So I've had some folks say, oh, how long does something like this take? About 10 weeks. It's really not as complicated as you might think. Now, when I say complicated, I'm talking about the solution. The data and the science and everything behind it is very, very complex, but our goal and our mission is to make it simple. So, getting to the point that I made about the past, and this is where I find it just absolutely fascinating because everybody can relate to this example. So, in 1939, the United States had 189,000 troops. 189,000. We were the 17th largest army in the world. Pretty paltry, but there was an effort after World War I to reduce arms, reduce troop levels. There was this, we don't want to get into wars, we're just going to stay isolationists, and that's not our problem. Well, we all know what happened in 1941 with the invasion of Pearl Harbor. Whether we liked it or not, we were thrust into this World War conflict that had began in 1939, which we thought we could avoid. So 1941, we're up to about 1.5 million troops, not bad, but still a far cry from the 8 million plus troops that the United States had in 1945. So if you think about the sheer volume of people that we had to train and equip and deploy and disperse across two fronts, one in the Pacific and one in Europe, that's a lot in such a short period of time. So how did we do that? Well, George Marshall. Anybody here know who George Marshall is? Hopefully. Well, if you don't, you should. George Marshall is one of those guys in history that had a phenomenal impact on our country today and, quite frankly, the world. And it was from his leadership and his ability to understand what was coming and to, quite frankly, identify talent and talented people and put them in the right roles to help them to succeed. So George Marshall, following World War I, was a major in the Army. And he wrote a letter in 1920 to George Mallory that basically said, this is a problem. We've got to really think about how we're going to prepare for when this thing crops up again, because this isn't over. We signed basically an armistice after World War I and said, time out, everybody's done with the war. But George Marshall knew that the Germans and the other evil entities in the world at that time weren't finished, and that we never really resolved the conflict. So he said, look, he was only a major now. He's not a general at this point. We've got to think about how we are hiring and deploying our most talented folks across the Army to make sure that we're ready to fight the next battle when it comes up. And he identified 7 characteristics that the next leader in the Army needed to have to be successful to battle the next enemy. 6 of the 7 were all behavioral characteristics. So physicalness was the only one that wasn't a behavior. So why is that so profound? I mean, to us it sounds, okay, that makes sense. But you got to remember at the time, everything in the Army was just tests and aptitude. There was this whole thing around, field, we still hear it today. Have they been in battle? Have they done this? Have they done that? He saw right through that and said, yeah, that's all good, but this is what they need. So, 1939, George Marshall is now, he was appointed Chief of the Army, Chief of Staff of the Army. Anybody else know what happened on September 1st, 1939? Anybody? Guesses? That's right, the invasion of Poland. So George Marshall, ironically, was appointed the same day that Hitler invaded Poland. At that time, following the invasion of Pearl Harbor, George Marshall, who knew Dwight Eisenhower coming up through the Army during his young time at West Point up through the ranks, Dwight Eisenhower was a lieutenant colonel in the Army, and George Marshall called Dwight Eisenhower and said, I need you to give me a plan on how we're going to defeat the Japanese in the Pacific. And so Dwight Eisenhower said, give me 3 hours. And he came back and he gave him a plan to defeat the Japanese. What's so profound about that is Marshall already knew what Eisenhower was about when he called him into his office. So he knew the kind of work he was going to get. Now, fast forward to Normandy, he's the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, and we all know that he was soon to become president. So Dwight Eisenhower, because of George Marshall, was elevated over 350 top commanders to become Supreme Allied Commander, all because George Marshall had the foresight to understand these things. Now, what's perhaps the most critical for us to understand is we're all not George Marshall. As much as we would all like to think that we're George Marshall, we're not. We all don't have that same ability to identify talent and to be have as much foresight as George Marshall did. But we do have the benefit today of being able to use technology to help us to make those same predictions that George Marshall was able to make, 70 some odd plus years ago. So now I'm going to bring up Jill, and she's going to talk to you about how do we do this, how do we apply those same principles, knowing what we know today with the technology that we have available to us.
Thank you. So I am Jill Strange. That is Dr. Strange. So for those of you Marvel fans, I'm going to bend time and space a little bit here, and we're going to go from the past into the future, talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and how this really is helping us to identify behaviors of our high performers within roles today. So let's see if I can work the clicker, just like that. All right, so like Kurt said, we cannot all be George Marshall, right? He had a talent for identifying talent, and he knew what it took to be successful within the US military. If you think about hiring within many of the organizations that we work with today, you may be dealing with thousands upon thousands of resumes. And if you're a recruiter, going through those thousands of resumes one by one is not effective. And to top that off, you may not be all that great at identifying what good talent looks like. So the way that we have gotten around this in the past, and this was kind of around during World War II, it's just getting started, was through assessing people. So who all has ever applied to a job and taken a test? Any kind of test, personality, skills test, yeah, a lot of people, okay? This is the way that as industrial psychologists, which is what I am, we identify who is likely to be successful in the job. And this has been around for 50 years, but only recently are assessments getting really, really good at identifying characteristics of people consistently and in a way that provides a common language for everybody. But a good assessment isn't necessarily enough. I can give you an assessment and I can find out a lot about you, understand your behaviors really well, but that's not necessarily going to tell me if you're going to be any good at a job or not, right? So the way that kind of the artificial intelligence and assessment industry is going right now, it's helping us take this data about people and using the data that we have about people within our workforce to understand, are you going to be a good fit for this role? Are you going to be a good fit for this role? Are you going to be a good fit for this role? All right, so let's talk a little bit about that. The way to ensure that this process works the way that we want it to is that we have to rely on people and data. Let me tell you a little bit about why that's important. Old school assessment, 50 years ago, 40 years ago, 30 years ago, even just 10 years ago, if I wanted to build an assessment, this is my world, this is where I started out in my career, I would go to an organization and say, great, you want an assessment? I will build one for you. I'm going to take a bunch of your really smart people within your organization that know a lot about this job that I want to build an assessment for. I'm going to bring them into a room and we're going to talk about what's important for this role. I want you to give me your opinion on what makes a person successful in this job. What are the competencies? What are the skills? What are the behaviors? I'm going to take all that information that you tell me and I'm going to go build you a test. And that test is going to measure exactly what you told me it would, okay? Which is kind of a good way of getting about things, right? We're using experts, we're understanding what is important. But at the end of the day, it's somebody's opinion, right? It's your opinion of what you think is important on this job. And maybe you're right and maybe you're wrong, but I don't know that. So the old way of doing this was relying on opinion, and it becomes all about the test that you're developing. To do this more effectively, what we want to do is somehow evaluate the people in the job. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually look at the people in the role and find out what is it that's really making them successful? I'm not relying on your opinion anymore, I'm looking at you and I'm knowing what is it about you that makes you successful. So we do this through people and we do this through data. And this is the system that we have at Infor Talent Science. So how can we use machine learning and AI to understand and improve our workforce, right? So how do we kind of make this leap from more subjective assessment into artificial intelligence and really using data to understand people. So this is where I'm going to start talking about this a little bit more. I'll take you into our system. I'll talk to you about how we do this. And I am going to go a little bit into our machine learning approach. But as you all, I'm sure, are very aware, machine learning and artificial intelligence are extremely complex processes. Okay? I'm not going to take you deep into the math. I am happy to geek out about this later on if you want to. I would love to do that. So come talk to me afterwards if you want to talk further. So when we're building kind of this next generation of assessment, we do want to look beyond those traditional methodologies. Kind of like I said, we don't want to rely on opinion. And we want to be able to create quantifiable intelligence. Okay? I want to be able to understand the data that I'm taking from your people, the data that I'm taking from your organization, your KPIs, and determining in a quantifiable way what is driving success. And the way we do this at Talent Science is through our Infor Coleman AI platform. So this is similar to Watson. It's our AI solution that takes data from multiple sources, pulls it together, and helps us to draw conclusions. We have a lot of data. And within Talent Science, we have been around for 17 years now. We were acquired by Infor 4 years ago. Previously, we were People Answers. And over the time that we've been doing this methodology, we test approximately 18 million people per year. So the assessments that we give, we test 18 million people. We have 200 million people in our database, so a lot of data to work with and a lot of data to help us refine our models and understand whether they're working or not. For each profile we develop, and I'll go into what a profile is here in a moment, we have about 11 million data points in each one of those. So just within a single instance of what we do, tons and tons of data. We also do this across the world, so 17 different languages, 25 plus companies. So not only are we looking at the US workforce, we're looking broadly and understanding what behavior looks like across the world. Now, the way our process works, and I'm going to take kind of a hiring example, because oftentimes we do this with hiring and ensuring people are going to be a good fit for the organization when they come in. But we do this for coaching and development and succession planning as well. But the way our process works is job candidates come in and they complete an assessment. This assessment measures 25 different behavioral, cultural, and cognitive characteristics. These are things that make people who they are, right? This is how ambitious are you? This is how disciplined you are. This is how analytical you are. Your numerical reasoning, your verbal reasoning. We understand a lot about this candidate through this assessment. We call this their behavioral DNA. It's really that person's unique pattern of behaviors that makes them unique. I have my own, you all have your own, we're all different. And this is great information to know about a person, right? If you're a hiring manager and you understand who this person is, that's good information. But it's not giving you a benchmark and telling you, is this person going to be good at the job or not? And this is where the behavioral performance profile comes into play. The profile is the optimal pattern of behavioral, cultural, and cognitive characteristics that lead to success on the job. And this is what we're getting at through our process, understanding that benchmark. Once we take the candidate and compare them to a profile, we are able to look at whether they're a good fit or not, what sort of gaps they have, how can we understand whether they'll be successful in the job, and how can we make them improve? How can we help them to improve? So beyond that, with this single assessment, candidates come in and they take this online. We understand their behavioral DNA, and we can compare that behavioral DNA against any profile in our system, and we've built about 4,300 over time. So we understand a lot of different jobs. We understand what success looks like in those jobs. So if this candidate comes in and they apply for 3 roles, right? We can compare them against an auditor, a financial analyst, and a caseworker. I know those wouldn't necessarily all be applied to by the same person, but kind of you get the idea here. So what the recruiter can do and the hiring manager can do is look and see, is this person going to be a good fit for any of these jobs? The better you fit to your profile, the more likely you are to be successful in the role. So I've applied to the auditor role, financial analyst, caseworker. I'm a good fit for my first 2 roles and not such a great fit for that caseworker role. So if I'm hired as an auditor, in the system, this is all dynamically generated based upon what we find to be a good fit to the profile or not. We have custom coaching and development content that's dynamically generated for the person. And then we can also start to think about succession planning strategies. So if I have profiles that kind of take me beyond that initial layer, so my auditor level, I can start to look and see, is this person going to be a good fit for a lead auditor, a program analyst, a supervisory auditor? And I can start thinking about my succession planning strategies over time. So a lot of power here just from a single assessment, and then the process and the power of it really is kind of in these profiles. So I can start to identify future career path. Now this is where I'm going to start to kind of get into how we do this and what is actually involved. To build these profiles, it all starts with current incumbents in the job. So if I were going to build an auditor profile, like I just showed, I would go to an organization and I would say, all right, I need a sample of your auditors. Okay, so if you have 1,000 auditors within your group, I would take a subset of those people. So 100, 200, 300, however many we would deem to be kind of the right sample size there. From those incumbents, I'd collect two pieces of data. I'd collect their assessment data, so I'd understand what their behavioral DNA looks like. And I'd also collect performance data from them. Now, this performance data can be anything that helps me understand who are my high, my mid, and my low performers. Okay? So depending on the role, that performance data is going to change. If it's a sales role, I'm going to be using a sales number. If it's a call center, maybe I'm using average handle time. Maybe I'm using a quality score. Maybe I'm using a sales score in that situation as well. Maybe I'm using your performance evaluation from your organization. Anything that helps me understand that data. From there, I take those two pieces of data and we put that into our Coleman system, where we're analyzing the data to look for relationships, determine the probability that we'll be finding a high performer or a low performer. And in the end, we have this behavioral profile that gives us the optimal pattern of characteristics that help us succeed in the job. Oh, great. And I turned that off. There we go. So when I talk about a profile, I want to show you what this actually kind of looks like. And I'll get into the system a little bit later, and I'll show you what this really is live. But what you're seeing right now is the scorecard. Okay, so this is one report in our system, and I mentioned that when we compare a person to a profile, we can get a variety of reports. But this is one report. We have competencies along the left side, and these competencies can be any competencies that you have within your organization. We'll map these into yours so you can understand how people align to your system. We have our behavioral characteristics, so those 25 characteristics that we are using to understand our people. And then we have different pieces of information associated with those. So I'm going to zero in on reflective, and let's take a look at that. Reflective is one of those characteristics that helps us understand how much does a person reflect upon their previous experiences when they're making a decision. Okay, so if you're high in reflective, you're somebody who's really going to analyze your decisions. You're going to be thinking about what happened last time you made a decision. Or you can be lower on reflective, and you can be a person who acts more on instinct. So when we're building these profiles, what we want to understand is how much of each characteristic do I need? It's not looking for the absence or presence of a characteristic. It's where do I need to be along that spectrum? Our candidate gets compared to that particular characteristic in respect to that optimal target range. So that green band is the place on that scale where we are more likely to find a high performer over a low performer. And if I'm a candidate, what I want to do is fall pretty much right in the middle of that optimal target range. That's going to give me a good score on the profile itself. We also have predictive power, and that tells us how important that characteristic is to that profile overall. So in some profiles, reflective is going to be very important, and it's going to get a high percentage, like 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. In other profiles, maybe it's going to be very low, 0.1, 1%. Not very important. It's telling me the impact of that characteristic. So each profile is going to be different, right? You're going to have different characteristics that are going to have higher predictive powers on one profile versus another. And then that optimal target range is going to move based upon the profile itself. So let's talk a little bit more about how we actually get here. So high-level view, I'm going to take you down a little bit deeper. When we have the data from your incumbents, the performance data and the assessment data, what we want to do is identify the relationships between that data, those pieces of data, the probability that we'll bring in somebody successful over somebody unsuccessful, and then roll this up across all of the different characteristics to identify the most predictive results. So let's first talk about this. And my animation's a little fast here. The first thing we do when we pull this data in, and we're still talking about kind of the company level here, and kind of the bigger data comes in a little bit later. First thing we do is we start to plot out people with relation to their assessment scores and their performance data. So in this graph here, you have a performance score of 0 to 250 on your y-axis, right? And again, that performance data could be anything that helps us understand high, mid, and low performance. And then we also have, along the x-axis, our ambition score. So one characteristic we measure is ambition. Do you want to climb the corporate ladder or don't you? You could be very low in that characteristic and have a 0. You could be very high in that characteristic, have 100, or you could be anywhere in between. Now, when we think about behavioral data and testing and kind of things of this nature, oftentimes we think, I need to be the highest. I need to be the best. If I don't get an A on this test, I don't know the material. It's not that way with personality data. We don't always want the person who is the highest in ambition. We don't always want the person who is the most analytical or the most conscientious, because we know that success at work doesn't always mean you have to be the highest in every behavioral characteristic. That and, I mean, imagine if you were building a profile and looking at a person who worked at McDonald's, for example. What would happen? Everybody at McDonald's had super high ambition and just wanted to climb the corporate ladder. Their turnover would be awful, right? Everyone would be leaving. Everyone would be trying to find that next opportunity. So in some roles, maybe you do want somebody with high ambition. In other roles, maybe you don't. So human behavior typically does not look like this when we're talking about personality. It looks more like this, where you've got your high performers, your low performers in red, your mid-level performers in blue. And what we do is we model different types of relationships. So the first relationship I showed you was a linear relationship. This is a quadratic or a curvilinear relationship, where we're seeing as ambition increases, performance increases, up to a point, right? Where a person's ambition can get too high, and that actually, hi Colleen, can impact your performance as well. So what we want to do here is figure out what is that best fit, and how do we look at these different characteristics to determine where that optimal target range should go. So we know we've got a curvilinear relationship. We know that that optimal target range, that green band, is going to go somewhere in the middle. And we would probably say here, I know it's a little hard to see, but it's right around all those green top performers, right? If I put an optimal target range there, I would have a higher probability of finding a high performer over a low performer, because I have all of my green high performers in the band, and I've got low performers outside, okay? So that's kind of a first step, a first cut at looking at that optimal target range. Now, something even better might look like this. I only have high performers in my range, right? I have no low performers in my range. And what our system does, and this is kind of where a lot of the automation comes in, is it optimizes where that target range needs to be in order to not only increase my probability of bringing in a high performer over a low performer, but also make this profile useful to my recruiters. Because I could have very narrow optimal target ranges throughout my entire profile and every characteristic. And if a person scored high on my assessment, the likelihood that they would be really, really good is really, really high. However, if I have ranges that are that thin and that small across every characteristic, no one is ever going to match my profile. So it becomes a balancing act. We can build something extremely predictive that no one's ever going to match, but if I do, man, that person's going to be really good. Or I can kind of think about how do I optimize this range to account for the fact that, yes, I want to increase my probability, but I also want to be able to bring in high performers. So the way we do this is, for each profile, we determine kind of an initial target range based upon the data from the organization, and then we leverage those 200 million people in our database, and we start running simulations. Okay, so we run simulations to see what performance is going to look like, because we have performance data on many of those people. I also have turnover data in my system. So I can say, okay, if my target range is here, and it looks like this across my entire profile, what's my turnover likely to look like? What's my pass rate likely to look like? What's my performance likely to look like? So I'm taking all this data, not me, Coleman, thankfully, take me a while, all of this information together and determining where are these bands going to be placed that's going to give me the best result. Okay, so that's the first step. Now, the next piece is figuring out what those weights are going to be. And this is all wrapped up together, right? It kind of takes like each characteristic one by one, and it determines what is the right range, and then what is the right weight. So I'm going to give you 3 examples here. In each example, our range is going to be around our top performers, right? And that can either be up high, it can be down low, it can be somewhere in the middle, depending on the relationship. In the first situation, we start to think about where are the low performers also. So I've got my low performers on the bottom, right on top of my high performers. There's not really any separation between my high and low performers. So this characteristic isn't telling me a whole lot. It's not really differentiating between those top and bottom performers. And in this case, I'm going to have a very low weight. I'm not going to be 14%. I'm going to be 0, 0.1, 0.2. Second situation, some separation. I've got a little bit more overlap, but I'm starting to see this characteristic is pulling apart the top performers from the bottom performers. And in this case, 4, 5, 6%. You can probably see where I'm going here. Big separation. These are going to be your 13s, 14s, 15s. So throughout this process, we're looking at what's the relationship between the assessment data and the performance data. What is the probability we'll bring somebody in that's successful over somebody that's not successful? And then really determining how strong is that relationship and how does that influence our weight. So we do this characteristic by characteristic. I'm going to go through this about 25 more times. Is that cool? I thought you might want to see like one by one. No? No, we're good? All right, I won't do that. So for each characteristic, we understand what is important, how does this differentiate performance, and then how does this all work together and counterbalance itself to give me the most predictive profile. So in the end, it's those characteristics that have the strongest relationships, the highest probability of bringing in somebody successful over somebody that's not, and rolling that up across all of the characteristics to bring me the predictive results that result in my profile. Okay? So that's kind of my super high level how we do machine learning and artificial intelligence at Infor Talent Science. Like I said, I'm happy to talk with you more about exactly how we do that, but that's my 50,000 foot view. Now, this is testing and assessment, and we are bound by EEOC and OFCCP guidelines that we need to follow. So with every profile that we develop, we have to validate this profile. And we do that through an empirical process, just like everything we do at Infor Talent Science. We rely on data to tell us, is this profile going to work? Now, right when we build this, we're doing what's called a concurrent criterion validation study. And this tells us what is the relationship between a job incumbent's score on the profile and their score on the performance side. So we have all their performance data, we can run them through the profile, we understand what their score is going to be. And what I want to see is a high correlation between performance and their score. That's how we validate up front. And that's what the EEOC has us do through the Uniform Guidelines of 1978. But beyond that, we want to go in and actually prove to our clients that this is working, because we are software as a service. Clients renew or not, and we want to be sure that we keep them. So we always want to go in and demonstrate to them this is the ROI that we're providing. And beyond that, we just want to see that our system is working, right, over time. So we look at this in a couple of different ways. This is an example of a turnover study that we did for a financial institution. In this situation, they, over a course of 1.5 years, they had a control group where they did not deploy talent science and another where they did, and we compared the turnover rate without and with. So turnover is something that we use oftentimes as kind of a proxy for performance, because people who are better at the job, who are better performing, tend to stay longer on the job. So this is an indication that our profile is working. When they used talent science, they had a 42.8% less turnover rate than that control group. So showing us what we want to see. We also look at results from voluntary versus involuntary, and we see big drops in involuntary termination as well. So did you get fired? Were you asked to leave for some reason? Now, on the other side, we also look at performance data. And this particular study was over 3 years. And we looked at people who were a good fit to the profile versus people who were a poor fit to the profile. So people who did not fall in those optimal target ranges versus people that were. And in this case, we found that when people were not recommended to the profile, when people were recommended to the profile, they were receiving on average 23.8% higher commissions than people who were not a good fit to their profile. So indications that this is working. From a public sector side of things, we work with Florida Department of Children's Services and did a similar study for them and found that when people were a good fit to their profile, turnover was about half of what it was when people were not a good fit to their profile. So we work in financial services, as these two slides showed. We work with government agencies. We actually work with NASA, so a lot of different clients out there that really span the range of industries and types of jobs. We also work with fast food, so a lot of entry-level hourly as well. So I'm going to get into the system and kind of show you a little bit more about what we do here. And then we're going to take some time for, actually, right now as I'm getting in here, what questions do you all have up to this point? Zero, oh, back there, okay. Yes, so when we validate this at the organizational level. So we're not using an industry standard, although we can and we have those, but usually when we go into organizations, I would go to you and I'd say I need your people and we're gonna assess them and we're not gonna rely on kind of what's happening out there in the world when we build our initial model. It's when then we go into kind of testing it and simulating the different models that we use outside data. But it's all, yeah. Right. So in the case of NASA, the flight controllers that we work with, obviously a very unique job that, there aren't many of them in the world. So what we did was we went to them and we assessed their flight controllers, the people currently doing that job. We collected performance data on them. And in that case, we were really trying to see who would pass training or not. Because they have a very complex training program where it's a year long and a lot of money's invested up front. And if people fail that training program in the end, that's a big loss. Right? They don't want that to happen. So what we did is we went in, we looked at successful flight controllers, compared those two, they're all pretty good. They all got through training, but we compare them to the people that are less successful. And we start building our model on what is it really about those super high performers that's driving us to success. Sure.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So this is two pieces. So it's the self-report assessment. So we're using industrial psychology principles to evaluate people's behavior, as well as their cognition and their cultural preferences. But then we're also using either a manager evaluation, if that's the performance metric that we're using, and preferably it'd be an objective metric. So a sales number, a quality score, anything like that. So a little bit of both.
So soft skill and emotional intelligence are two key things.
Yes. Yeah, so that actually is oftentimes folded into the performance data. So soft skills and emotional intelligence, you said. So emotional intelligence is part of the actual assessment battery. So one of the characteristics that we're measuring, it's not called that, but it's actually emotional intelligence is a combination of characteristics. So that's measured within our assessment. And then the soft skills piece, really what we want to understand is how do those apply to the job. So if I know that you need to be able to communicate, you need to problem solve, and you need to have strategic thinking, how does that manifest itself in the role? So what does a successful person on the job look like when they're strategically thinking? How do I know somebody's doing a good job? And we'll evaluate people through evaluations in that case, so manager evaluations. And then we relate that back to, strategic thinking for this role means that you are high in discipline and lower in ambition and mid-range and analytical. And it changes based upon the job, but we look for those correlations. We have another question? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My background, IT consulting, recruiting years ago. It used to be, well, we could go to 150 different schools, but you know what? Over the years, we found candidates from multiple schools, but over the years, we found that recruiting at these specific 6 schools gets us that data set.
Yes, so that is something that we do look at in our system. We track sources and we can pull in that kind of data. It depends on if we're used as an applicant tracking system or not, because oftentimes that data would be collected in the applicant tracking system. So we'll either integrate or we'll collect that ourselves. But yes, we do perform analytics on that and we can start to say, all right, people from this organization or this school look a certain way. people from this school look a certain way. So you may want to start directing your recruiting efforts more toward these areas. So we find more high-fit candidates from this school as opposed to this school, maybe focused over here, or industries or job boards. It really kind of depends on whatever you're looking for, wherever you're looking for people. We can start to analyze that and see kind of how are people loading or looking against the profiles. Sorry, my connection went away for a moment. So,
Yes, sir. Well, she's doing that. Right here. Yes, sir.
So if a part of this essentially data that you feed into the system comes from the evaluation, then all of the existing biases that are in the system could be fit in. And now the next cycle around, everybody can say, is the system recommending this?
yes, no, that's a really, really good question. So bias in AI is a very big topic right now. So we look to eliminate bias in a couple of different ways. The first place is looking in the performance data, because if we're going to have bias, oftentimes it's going to show up at that level, right? The manager is rating one group higher than the other group overall, or we're seeing just differences in terms of how people are performing. And it may not be malicious. It may not be that people are actively discriminating. It could just be, it's just happening. So in that case, we will either go back to the organization and say, look, we're finding this in your data. What's going on? Help us understand this. And that's sort of our first line of defense. We often try to kind of work out some of those issues when we're collecting the data. But beyond that, part of the process where we're running these 200 million people against these profiles is we're looking for evidence of adverse impact. If we find that the profile that our system has created is creating some sort of adverse impact against a protected group, we work to take that out. And that's done through other automated adjustments that happen within the profile. And sometimes that may result in a slightly less predictive profile. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it increases the validity of that profile. But the process that we go through is that we have to remove that adverse impact, because we do not want that to be happening in any of our clients. And we've never been sued by an employer or a candidate, and we plan for it to continue that way. So after 17 years, we've never been challenged in court. Yes.
Have you ever considered interview or referral data? Do you collect that at any level?
So we do. It's not built into our original algorithm, but here, let me show you kind of what we have here. I'll show you an example. So when we get into our system, I've just looked at an IT analyst position. You can have as many positions in here as you like and as many profiles as you like. But what happens is when people come in and they take the assessment, they're put into our queue of available people, and we have an overall score. So you could be a really poor fit to your profile and be not recommended, thumbs down. You could be still kind of a bad fit, recommended with reservations, that's a thumbs down, thumbs up in orange. You could be recommended with qualifications, thumbs up, then thumbs down, that's yellow. Or you could be a good fit. 84 here is Lemuel. What is going on? Oh, I didn't want to go in there. Sorry. 84, good fit, green thumb. So that's the kind of information we get up front. And that's just telling us a person's a fit to their actual profile. We can sort that. So as a recruiter, like I said earlier, if you've got 1,000 resumes that you're sorting through, you probably just want to see the really good people, right? The people that are recommended or recommended with qualifications. And I'm going to go ahead and click into, let's look at Muriel. She's got a 79, so she's a pretty good fit. She's not completely recommended, but she does some disconnects, but she'd be okay. When I look at Muriel, the first thing I see is her overview report. And what we have are the competencies that this company has selected to be their competencies. We do have a default model, but we also can build in your own competencies so you can see how people compare against your own benchmarks and indicators. We have then our job components. So core characteristics are the top 5 characteristics on the profile, the ones with the highest weight. We have assets and liabilities, and this is just a very high-level view of what are the person's assets in relation to this particular job that we're looking at, and what are some liabilities that they may have. We also can look at their career path, so the system's able to take multiple profiles and build them in here so that we can understand, okay, she's a pretty good fit for this IT analyst role. She's recommended reservations for the team lead. So maybe not such a great fit to move into that lead position right away, but potentially later on she will be, with some coaching and development, and we'll talk about that as well. So that's the overview report. We have the scorecard, which I showed you earlier. system's being very slow. And again, just as I showed you before, competencies, behavioral characteristics, we have all of those different optimal target ranges that we've identified through our high performers. We have our weights, and this continues on down. And what's great about this is that everything is clickable and everything has dynamically generated content. So for analytical, proven success in this role requires the ability to balance a broad view of issues while investigating some specifics. Muriel is able to focus on the larger and the smaller issues of a situation when solving problems. So she's kind of in the middle of that optimal target range, so she's a pretty good fit here on analytical. Now if we look at something like, let's scroll down a little bit. Let's look at flexibility. So she's flexible at times and is comfortable making moderate amounts of adjustments at work. Alternatively, success in the role demands a greater willingness to adapt than he would prefer. So what we want to do here is start to understand what are the person's disconnects, how can we think about this person in relation to the job, and eventually how do we understand how to better manage them. So we're still talking about hiring here, but we have a narrative report that kind of takes all of that information and puts it into text format. So if you have a person who isn't really comfortable looking at that actual scorecard, the system will generate dynamic content. This is, again, all based upon that profile and the person's fit to the profile. So it tells us what are some strengths of Muriel, what are some opportunities, notable characteristics, and then it goes into the individual competencies. So a lot of content here and a lot of information that helps us understand this person. Now to the question that we just had about interview questions, we do dynamically create interview questions as well. And these are all based on disconnects. So discipline was a disconnect that Muriel had on the scorecard. What happens is the system will identify questions, and in this case, sort of situational interview questions, that you can ask Muriel to help you better understand that disconnect. So if she is disconnected, she's really missing that mark, what kinds of questions can we ask her in the process to understand if she is likely to be if that's really likely to be a big problem or not. We also are able to build in interview guides from the organization. So if you do have a competency-based interview guide, we can build that in. So in this case, casino gaming, which I guess could relate to IT analyst, depending on the kind of role that you're in. Maybe, we'll see. But then we also have other interview questions as well. So the system will create kind of this whole process for you to help understand not only the person and their disconnects from the profile and where they connect, but also what are those interview questions that we can ask them to see if they can actually overcome those. And then over time, we also have development content, we have behavioral onboarding, but on the development side, we can start to take that information, and this is where that career path comes into play. So we know that Muriel was a 79 on this particular one, and on the team lead, she's a 68. So what happens underneath is all of this information changes based upon her fit to this new profile. So then you can use our development content to start to kind of coach her up to this new role. So if you know she's doing well at that IT analyst role, how can we get her to the point where she's going to be a good team lead? So all of this based upon that whole system underneath, where we're looking at the incumbents, we're looking at the relationships, we're looking at the probability, and we're looking about how this will function kind of across the organization as a whole. So I am running out of time. I told you I talked too much. but I will open it back up to questions and happy to answer any more. Yes?
Does the candidate get to see their results?
So we have another report that's candidate-facing. We actually have two candidate-facing reports. One of them is a very positive report that doesn't really talk about their disconnects. It's more just here's who you are. And then we also have an onboarding report that kind of talks to them about, here are the things you can expect during training, here are the things that you could expect with your manager, here's how you are going to interact with your coworkers, that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, there are a few factors. So the question was, does the ROI and the type of ROI we look at change depending on the level in the organization? So yes. Okay. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it varies. It's always helpful, right? I mean, we always want to be able to show them something. So it just is sort of what do we show them? So in some cases, maybe that's looking at 30-day turnover at a fast food restaurant, right? Because they don't expect people to stay for 2 years, and that's fine. They just want to lower their 30-day turnover, their 60-day, their 90-day turnover. Other organizations may not really care about turnover because it's so low, right? Nursing is an area where there's low turnover, but they want to be sure that their patients are being provided the best care possible, that the patients are being communicated with. So there it turns into more of a performance conversation. Are we hiring quality people? Are those people performing well over time? And sometimes it's both. So it depends on the organization, and we go in and we consult with the organization to determine what is the right kind of ROI, what do we really want to be looking at, and how can we show you that we're successful. So yeah, so it's dependent on the company, because yes, you'll find definite differences between fast food and high level.
Follow-up question on the scorecard. Do you have supplier scorecards?
Do I have what?
Supplier scorecarding?
Supplier?
Yeah, if you have IT suppliers.
Oh, okay. So we would build that custom. We have a generic IT profile overall that we would use kind of at an industry standard level. We would almost only use those, though, for positions where there were very few incumbents. So if we had enough incumbents where we could build a model, we would want to build that custom to an organization. But I'd have to look to see if we have developed that. I mean, we've built over 4,000, so I imagine there's something similar in there that we've done before. Okay, thanks.
One more?
So the list of traits or criteria, are they kind of the industry standard? I see a few dozen.
Yep, so they're based on personality research. So big 5 personality research and then the 16 PF. So
Okay.
it's personality research that's been around for many years.
So then in your study doing machine learning and stuff, do you uncover like new traits? Like, a high score in one coupled with a low score in another is actually a good thing than
Yes,
new
so,
traits.
So things can kind of offset each other. A good example of that would be somebody who is, and this is sort of a negative example, but somebody who's very extroverted but has very low interpersonal sensitivity. So have you ever met that person who won't stop talking to you, even though you know that they should know that you don't want them to talk to you anymore? That would kind of be a bad combination. So we do look for things like that at times. And there are positive things as well. You may want somebody who's conscientious with somebody who is a little less assertive in certain roles where they're not supposed to be client-facing, they're back of house, they need to be heads down in data. Maybe that's a good combination. But it again kind of depends on the role, depends on the company. So, but yes, there are relationships like that are well researched, and then we do apply some of those within our own. Yeah.
We got one more here, and I just want to let everyone know that there is a break. So the next session is until 3:05 if you want to go get beverages or a snack.
I see some of the interview questions and all you mentioned. Do you participate in the interviews?
Okay, sorry. Maybe no microphone. It's hard to hear with the...
No. I have seen some interview questions you mentioned in that. Do you participate in an interview?
Do we... No.
No, so we wouldn't participate. We would provide
sorry.
interview questions to the people doing the interviews and make suggestions on which questions they should ask or shouldn't ask. Right.
And then you
to
get
draw,
the feedback from...
Right.
Then you get the feedback from the people who did the interview, and then you try to start the assessment.
That's right. So, when somebody applies for a role, they just take a quick, on their phone, an assessment. Mm-hmm. And there's no right or wrong answers. And then that profile then is placed, basically up against the job that they're applying for to see if they're a fit. And then, like Jill talked about, where you have situations where it's like, they're kind of borderline here. The system will then prompt the interviewer or the hiring manager to say, you really need to talk to Kurt about X, and draw that out if you're kind of unsure about whether or not to hire him or her or me in this case, whatever.
What is this you mentioned about bots, B-O-T-S?
Bots?
What is that?
Well, I mean, so like I've seen a lot of, talking a lot about public sector and doing different things, right? There's there's all these misconceptions around, bots. So for example, like RPA, you've probably heard of robotic process automation and some of that kind of stuff. So this is certainly different, but there's also the chat bots, right? So if you're in Microsoft Teams or take your pick, and there's some artificial intelligence computer behind it answering your questions or whatever. Just differentiating between that and what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
That's all.
And within HCM, I mean, artificial intelligence is really in its infancy, and it really has kind of gone that direction of, I'm going to ask my HRAS how much I'm getting paid, or who did I promote last, or when was I hired. It's all very much that conversational user experience, and we just kind of wanted to showcase something that was sort of beyond that, right? So there are applications for AI beyond just the chatbots that are kind of cropping up in many HCM applications now.
Sorry, just one question here. I think just now when you presented, it's more to do with the behavioral analytics. But I think we have a problem here. It's more to do with the competency, kind of quantitative analysis, whether you have or you don't have, or how many years experience that you have, for example. Okay.
So sometimes what we do is we fold this into larger models. So yes, behavior is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot more that goes into whether someone's really going to be a good fit for a role, especially when you get into more specialized roles. So we can start to fold in, pre-screen questions to understand if people are, having those qualifications that they need. Do you need a degree in X, Y, and Z to be successful in this role? And we could start to build that into our system as well. So yes, I mean, there's definitely other things that you'd want to take into account. But what we find that regardless of the level of the position or the kind of role that we're looking for, good behavioral fit leads to better results for the company. And so that's what we're kind of adding that piece. Because a lot of times those evaluations are kind of subjective. Oh, you have a PhD from Cornell, you're going to be great, but maybe not, depending on the organization and depending on the job.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
All right, we're being ushered off the stage, I feel like.
We can chat with
yeah,
you.
We'll be.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.